Welcome to episode 2 of Rooted Resilience, a podcast where we explore narratives of current and contemporary Two-Spirit LGBTQIA+ creatives living on colonized Nipmuc, Nonotuck, and Pecumtuck land, also known as Western Massachusetts. I'm M.
And I'm Luc. And every second Tuesday of the month, we gather here to listen to these multi-talented culture creators with curiosity, intention, and a little bit of magic.
I'm not a manifestation girly, but if we don't start putting it out there, right, you never know what could happen. And I think within all kinds of communities, there's overlapping efforts. And I think in some ways as creators, we're always like, I'm gonna do my own thing. I wanna start my own thing. Not in a bad way, but I talk to folks all the time. We're like, I wanna open a physical space and wouldn't it be great to have that? And I love that we all have that. And I would be lying if I said I didn't want that too, right? Ever since the get-go, it was this dream of a space. And maybe that's because we're all craving a space, right?
In today's episode, we'll hear from M and Jey, two artists working independently and together to build community through their creative practices and as co-leaders of yet another queer pop-up market, a growing venture that centers Two-Spirit LGBTQIA+ and BIPOC artisans, makers, and creatives exploring their craft here in Western Massachusetts. M has lived in this area for over 13 years. As an artist, their work has been shown along the East Coast and has been purchased locally, nationally, and internationally. Their studio, To Encounter Belonging, is a regular fixture in the yet another queer pop-up markets. And yes, M is also typically my Rooted Resilience co-host, but for this episode, we'll get to hear more about their work outside of this project. Jey has lived in the Valley for nearly 10 years, relocating from the Midwest. A visual designer by trade, they started Found and Faded in 2023, making hand-dyed clothing and accessories before expanding to block prints and kitschy gifts for the inner child. One evening, shortly after their last winter market, I sat down with M and Jey to hear more about their work as friends and collaborators and as individual artists. Without further ado, here's M and Jey.
I'm M, they, them, non-binary, queer, and trans, artist in the Valley, also, name 72 other projects that I'm part of, as well as Rooted Resilience with Luc. For yet another queer pop-up market, it's a little bit complicated in this moment for my brain to sort exactly what the roles are that I hold. I would say that I hold a lot of our relationships in terms of our sponsors and maybe even with some of our makers. I am secondary to Jey in social media, reliant on their amazing design skills to brand us, and then picking up all of the pieces of getting our artists to collaborate with us on posts. There's a lot of backside organizing, spreadsheets, email returning that I help to hold. And there's a lot of day of responsibilities that I enjoy that also keeps me away from my table, which is not my favorite part. I love other people to table my table.
My name is Jey. My pronouns are they, them. I'm non-binary trans. I also identify as a Midwesterner and a dog dad, hobby enthusiast, collector of collections. But with the market, I really enjoyed the partnership with M. I feel like we have complementary skill sets. We collaborate on a ton of things, but I feel like I might drive more on the marketing side, communication side, and branding. But as we've grown, there's just so much. We kind of both share in a lot of the vendor support and those types of things and leading different parts throughout the process, I'd say.
The roots of this actually lie in our friendship. Jey and I have known each other since they moved out here from the Midwest, slowly and surely sort of growing a closer friendship. And we knew that we wanted to collaborate on something. I can remember Jey inviting me to have coffee one afternoon at Woodstart, and we were throwing around a whole lot of ideas of what could be possible. And we're excited to just see what might land. And then a little over a year ago, I think it was maybe September or October of 2023, Jay was like, we should just do our own market because I love opportunities to bring people together and to just really catalyze the space and make it something that feels yummy. I said yes, even though my partner was like, when are you going to fit that in? And I think that the roots of that were sort of founded in this idea that there's a lot of markets around the Valley. I think I'm maybe even more aware of it this year than I was last year. It was a little overwhelming to figure out where to start when you're new. It also can be hard to start when you're new because there are a lot of markets with a lot of talented people who have a lot of experience doing this and probably have a very detailed, organized calendar schedule for when to apply to all the things. And so it had been an interest of mine to figure out how to be in a market, but not like with any real success. And the idea of being able to cultivate a space for queer and BIPOC makers and to really center that just made sense to me, just like called out to me in a really big way. So that was part of my yes when Jay offered that up.
I think I really was living for the first time that experience I was talking about as like someone new to being a maker. I really just started kind of like probably as a way of working through like divorce stuff, but like getting more into myself, relearning what was important to me as a creative person and starting to try to channel that energy into like, it might be part of being in a capitalistic world, but how can I make this a productive hobby and turning into, things that other people will like and things like that. And then it was that kind of experience of like, how do you get started in this? It's very overwhelming. There's lots of options out here. People take risks anyway, and it's a large investment of your time, and it might not pan out depending on the market and the audience and how they're marketing it and all those types of things. But then as a queer maker, especially if you make queer-centric type things, right? A lot of what I do make centers around queer identity and all those things. You want to be well received and supported. And so then it got to this point of talking with M too. Yeah, it was just kind of like, why don't we just do our own? Because it's really complicated to figure out where to spend your time and effort and energy. And also, I want to acknowledge there have been other queer markets in the area. And part of our process was like, what's been going on? I know there were these other things, but as people burn out and things change or just things evolve, there was not really anything at that time kind of going on in that way. But, it's hard in the world of social media to figure out, okay, what was that account? Is this still active? Oh, they did things last summer. Oh, but it turned into that, kind of deal and track it. So yeah, all the more reason to just kind of carve out another. And that's kind of where the name came from, right? Like yet another queer pop-up market. It's being a little self-deprecating in a loving way, but with a nod that there's room for all of us, right? And I think that's part of what we've really seen in the support of the market is there's a lot of value to carving out an intentional lane for our commitment to queer and BIPOC artists and makers, because although there's a lot of events around the Valley, I don't know that that is a huge part of all of them.
This episode of Rooted Resilience is brought to you by Lemon Bakery. Based in Amherst, Massachusetts, Lemon Bakery is a queer and trans-owned bakery run by Rory Hansen, who provides homemade, locally sourced, seasonal baked goods via curbside pickup and delivery service, and at select locations around the Valley. Rory will be baking for all of our upcoming in-person Rooted Resilience events. Follow them on Instagram at Lemon Bakery Online and order online at lemonbakeryonline.com.
As we continue talking, I'm curious to learn more about my guests' individual histories. As I listen to M and Jey share, I'm struck, though not surprised, to discover how entwined their inspirations are and how often community comes up for both of them. Here's M.
I'll name myself as an artist, but that's not the thing that pays my bills, essentially, at least not right now. And I don't know that I want it to be the full-on thing. I had the privilege and also now the student debt to go to a fine arts college. And that was a hard-fought process for me to get there. And really, impacted me in a lot of ways. We might say positively and also maybe negatively too, because after I graduated from college, I took a step away from making things because I felt really conflicted about art as commerce, when it felt like my art just wanted to be my art in this world and not be deeply critiqued or, another source of stress for how I make money. And so I really launched more into the nonprofit world, more project and program management, more educational institutions, community organizing type things. And then in my late 20s, I came back to my practice in my sketchbook because I was living in California at the time and just spent a lot of time drawing things that I saw in the natural world. And then when I moved to Western Massachusetts, it was like the door opened again and I was ready to spend more intentional time creating. But I was still sorting out the same question I had in my 20s when I left college, which is, where do I belong in this world? In terms of my studio work, where does this live? And I've been really blessed to have multitudes of communities around me be supportive of the things that I create as I explore this, as I sell things online, as I have gallery shows, as I work with friends to sort public art opportunities. And the market just felt like an even bigger place to root myself inside of community with other artists. I had been lucky enough to be part of Assets for Artists, Artist U during the pandemic, and I got to understand what it meant to connect with a handful of artists monthly and really dive into our processes and the things we were trying to figure out around money and time and value and all of those things that we're constantly asking ourselves, and to really experience the camaraderie and the support of that. And then it ended, and while I'm still in touch with those people and love them very dearly, I was like, oh, what's next? Where are my next people that are going to come along that I can connect with in this way? And I think that that's where the market really intersects with my practice in a lot of ways, that not only is it a space to explore what it is to make something to sell, but that will also bring a lot of joy, and that's much more accessible than hanging inside of a gallery, although that has had merits too. Or to be commissioned for something and then to not know where in the world it lives, but to have an experience of, all of the queers in the region, because I feel like we have all the queers in the region that just come to our markets, and to watch them not only be impacted and to enjoy the work that I'm placing out in front of them, but also to see other makers and artists really be celebrated and connected in a really substantial way. That a lot of the feedback that we get from our makers and artists is that it feels really supportive, not just because of how Jay and I co-organize, but also artist to artist, we're all wanting each other to succeed. And so to be able to be a part of that while I'm still working out these questions about my practice and where it belongs in this world and how I make it accessible and sustainable, there's just a real joy in having this rooting and building more community.
I was just kind of reflecting on my relationship with self-describing as an artist. Growing up, I was always in the art class. When I got to college, I was like, you mean I can take whatever classes I want? And I did all of journalism, the whole art program, basically, right? But even within that, when I think back, I think there was a lot of pressure, probably just from myself, but that being good at art means being good at art in this realistic kind of, right? I think we all know someone who can just look at something and immediately draw it in this kind of hyper realistic way. And for whatever reason, I think it's just taken a long time to break out of that. There's so many ways, right, to create. And I have my day job. I've long done communications and marketing in a variety of nonprofit and for-profit sectors. And maybe it's some of that digital basis, but I still cart around my college portfolio, the portfolios you have to take to class. They're huge because they hold your 24 by 36 paper. I still have that from college. So there's still this deep connection to those, and they feel important, clearly, to kind of hold on to. But appreciating like the other makers in the market and all the different kinds of art that there are, right? And there's room for all of this. And like some of the things I make are maybe more utilitarian, right? Like I do design stickers and block prints and like cards, and I dye a lot of clothing and accessories. And so, but just like that, seeing people respond positively to it. Like I mentioned, some of it's about queer identity, and a lot of my stuff is maybe more cheeky or trying to be funny, but I'm exploring more themes around grief and like queer relationships and things like that. So I'm like also inspired by the vulnerability of some of our artists and makers. And that's such a powerful thing in the queer and trans community to have. So, but on a practical level, like when I first moved out here, I was really focused on my relationship and my career at the time. And so it took me a long time to build community. And I wished I would have had it, right? Like when my life changed. And so I've long known about myself that I enjoy doing work with friends. And so this is a really meaningful way to kind of build community. And like M has referenced, the market is so much more than a business space that pops up, right? Like it's a community space. Some people come, they don't buy anything. They're just coming for the community part of it. And so I think more than ever, that's just so important for us to be creating and to feel how powerful it feels when we all come together. And there's literally hundreds of people in the same space with masks on. And that increases that sense of like, we'll help take care of each other. Do you know what I mean? Because, you know, when things are hard, these are all the same people who are going to come together to take care, whether it's like mutual aid or whatever in the days ahead. It's been an ever-evolving adventure, I think, in some ways.
That's pretty accurate. I would say surprisingly easeful on a lot of levels. I don't think we necessarily knew that going in. I definitely didn't know that going in, but I was willing to jump in and try to work something through if it felt harder. It's been, I don't even know if I quite have the words for it. I just feel like being able to co-create this with Jay just makes everything so much better, right? Like I know that we're in this together and there's a lot of space to be like human and to be like, I keep on missing the posting deadlines for things, or, oh, you know, like we're 2 weeks late getting that out, or, you know, oh, I don't know what happened there, but we just lost some information, you know, that just got confused along the way. And that's a really affirming and loving experience. Not that we don't have moments where things feel a little tense, or we might feel like a little bit irritated with like the rhythms of things. But my experience with Jay is that neither of us hold it as something personal. Just like, oh my God, we're working through this process and here's the thing that popped up and how do we navigate it, right? Like there was definitely some stuff in this last market. It was like, surprise. We were like, okay, here we go. We're just going to, you know, like pull into our resources and see if we can't figure something else out to make this work. And that was actually really lovely to see. And we've had to do that in different iterations on every market for different things. So yeah, I would just say that it's been a real gift. It's been a really nourishing process. And mostly there's just a lot of joy there and a lot of appreciation.
Absolutely. I was thinking about how I was going to describe it like it is a lot of work, but it doesn't feel like a job in the sense all the dynamics you were talking about are like what you kind of wish for in your 9-to-5 job or whatever. So like the ability to have autonomy, but still collaborate and like deal with problems in ways that build the relationship. So that has been really helpful. But I think I've had a lot of learning from M and the way they build relationships and cultivate that and turn that into support for what we're doing that really helps us have a much more successful event than we would without all that support. And that's really great. You're a very lovely web of lots of connections. And but they're based in like solid relationships. It's not like connections for the sake of connections, you know? So it's a very authentic way of building support for what we do. And that's what's going to help create that sustainability. And then for myself, I feel like I'm learning a lot about what I'm really good at and what's too much for me to do, right? Like that balance of like too much. Yeah. But that's a process too, because our markets keep growing and changing. And now we've done a year of markets. We've done different kinds of markets, collaborative markets, our own indoor, outdoor, like different locations in the valley. And so each time there's just enough variables change that we experience new things and new challenges, but new positive outcomes as well. So it's a repeat event, but it's never the same kind of thing.
I think that's one of the most beautiful things about it, is that we are just always growing and shifting and changing, you know, in terms of how this market comes to life, and also how we meet people where they are, how we respond to vendors' needs, how we respond to community needs, how we engage with the people who are hosting us. Working with Jason at 50 Arrow was a magical experience, and I felt so lucky to be able to hold that relationship with him.
And the Eastworks, like as a location as well, like strong supporter of, we couldn't have had that big of a footprint if they weren't so generous with the space and everything.
In this next part of our conversation, you will get a peek behind the scenes of yet another queer pop-up market and hear how Jey and M's collaboration continues to evolve, which is not without its challenges.
You know, I think we're always balancing finances as just a very pragmatic, lived part of being inside of a capitalistic society, and how we navigate exchange, both in terms of venue, but also in terms of sponsorship, and also in terms of our makers. We want it to be accessible, and we also have bills to pay at the end of the day. 60 to 70% of our budget goes towards marketing. That's a really big commitment of ours, because we know that makes a difference in terms of who comes to be in the space with us, whether they spend money or not. We really want people there. And, you know, and then the rest of it is sort of divided between odds and ends of things, some of the bigger chunk being venue costs. And so that's where our sponsorships become really important. And there's also a real want to be able to uplift and center queer and trans and BIPOC businesses, right? And to be able to invite them into relationship with us, knowing that very similarly, they're having their own pragmatic financial experiences in this world. And so we're always sort of adjusting, like, how do we do the sponsorship tier? How do we make it accessible? How do we bring people in who have more roots financially that can support us and are deeply allied? And then how do we make sure that we're not leaving our community of businesses behind in this process? And how do we make it a meaningful experience for them? That it's not just like they're handing us $500 and we're like, cool, thanks so much. You know, which is also fine.
That's also that would be the end of the world. We'll be good stewards.
Yeah, we'll be good stewards to that. So I think that is something I've been thinking about. I think this winter market was one of our most expensive ones to navigate, even though we also had a lot of generosity and different ways to help support that.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the other challenges is just the practicality of logistics. You know, our market has grown a lot and more makers than ever. And I think we had a lot of success with having a new addition of a day of market manager, which is also a very worthy but additional cost to factor in. But at least for me, coexisting as a co-organizer and also a maker, and I am making stuff the night before, I am like dying things, like all like chaos, right? Like probably every other maker. And so to balance that with being present as a co-organizer has been challenging. But I think we're finding ways to navigate through that. That also leaves us with amazing help the day of and formalizing, you know, volunteers and those kinds of things. I think that's part of the sustainability piece, right? When too few people try to do all the parts, you're not going to last very long. So we've been dabbling in conversations about like, what does it look like for us to grow? I think some of that's been through collaborations with other event organizers who are doing different types of things, like with Corey and their cookbook, and then like with Ben and the Queer Core Collaborative, those like ways for us to kind of come in and organize a market aspect of another event, which was its own learning curve, but I think a great opportunity for us in some ways to think about like continuing.
Yeah, and I think learning the culture of each of those, right? Because those are very different experiences to have too. I mean, you can't like visually see me, but when Jay mentioned the day of market manager, my face was just like, yes. Like that's been, I think, a really big learning curve for us. And it was also a really big learning curve for me to figure out how to deposit the things in my head to this person who was completely capable and absolutely lovely and did an amazing job. Thank you, Javon.
Yes.
And to also, you know, have the support of Kit, who volunteered with us for a good portion of the time. And I think it also speaks to a bigger thing that we sort, which is, you know, it's not always going to be Jay and I, right? There's going to be a point at which we really want to be intentional about expanding to be able to invite other people in to co-create these markets with us. And, you know, that's something that's on the horizon. It's something that I won't name it as a challenge necessarily, but I will say that it's a thing that we are continuously thinking about, right? And so as we're exploring different collaborations and as we're doing things like hiring a day of market manager, we're trying to sort like, what does this feel like? Because right now I think Jay and I kind of share a brain on some level in terms of the flow of the market. And so there's a real ease in a lot of ways, even when we encounter new things, for how to sort of flip back and forth with it. And then there's that like moment of growth when you invite someone else in where you're like, oh, I suddenly have to create my processes and let you know exactly how this works. And
right, like we just knew what needed to be done.
Yeah.
Oh, whoops, so we gotta like share that.
What a terrible challenge to have, to be able to be in a place where we're trying to sort that out. That's really horrible.
Yeah.
I think the other thing we're thinking about a lot right now is just like the safety and care of our community. It would be on the docket for us to think about anyway, but particularly in the year that we're coming into, we're just cognizant, not only because of that, but just because of some other challenging encounters that we've had, that we need more grounding in ways to work inside of these spaces for care and safety of people. You know, for us, the foundation of it was, this is a masked market. We want people to be able to come and be with us and to know that they can be safe here. You know, we really wanted to be able to open that up wide. And then, you know, we had an experience at one of our markets where one of our very own community members came and was just really unwell. And we really struggled with how to navigate and support this person when it was an experience that was happening right in the middle of the event and was very disruptive and hard for people who heard what was going on. And now we're also looking at like the beauty of, you know, like the Dyke Patrol that comes and works with Translate Gender for their T-Dove event, and how we can make space and step into growing that kind of care for our community. And so that's a place that's a really painful challenge to have, but it's also a really beautiful challenge because we know that it'll do similarly to what we do within the market and how we hold our makers in terms of just building that culture of care.
Yeah, we're definitely going to need help from more people, right? For that health and safety aspect. Like this was the first time we kind of did like a comprehensive health and safety plan, right? Just trying to be more prepared, whether it's like a lost kid or needing to get everybody out of the building. Like these are just things that we need to be thinking of, especially when we have such a large event. And so we're going to have a more formalized approach to that in the future. And so that could be potentially a meaningful way for people to kind of connect to this and serve the community. But that culture of care was sometimes that plays into our financial situation because, you know, we offer sliding scale, but also if someone's sick, we refund their money. Like you don't get that as a maker at a lot of markets. Like we want you to take care of yourself. You're trying to take care of our community. And so like there will be, right, fluctuations, right? Like in the income as people inevitably cancel, we try to replace, but folks can't always turn around a full market setup in a day, but that's part of it. And that's part of what we plan for. And there's been times where we've also had like sponsors take care of vendor fees, right? And things like that for our BIPOC makers. And so I think there's just a lot of, from the registration needs, we collect accessibility needs, all the way to like offering early setup when we can for makers with different physical needs, and like helping people eat the day of with a lunch order that M organizes, and all those things kind of come together to create this really supportive environment for makers. And we hear about that like all the time during the event. And it would just like feel wrong not to do a lot of those things.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, that's why we do it. And I would say too that culture of care is now growing a different set of roots. The collaborative market that we did with Queer Core and then this winter market had roots towards mutual aid, right? Towards fundraising for different causes. And that feels really important for us to maintain, not only within our region, but also far reaching. And I imagine that it will be a part of our future markets as we continue to grow these.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward in the ways we can partner. There's a lot of people doing a lot of really important good work in our communities, like Em said here. But like, we're all over. And I think especially a lot of people end up out on the East Coast from all over. So we kind of got to acknowledge that interconnectedness and that we can care simultaneously on many levels and like kind of take action in those ways too.
This podcast is part of the Rooted Resilience Project, made possible through the generosity of our supporters and sponsors. Bombyx Center for Arts and Equity, a world-class performing arts space in Florence, Massachusetts, home to music, film, theater, dance, and memorable community gatherings. Visit bombyx.live to learn more. High Five Books, an inclusive kids bookstore known for graphic novels, middle grade readers, and picture books. High Five's collection focuses on social justice and LGBTQIA+ themes. Visit them in person in Florence, Massachusetts, and at highfivebooks.org. And yet another queer pop-up market, a growing venture that centers Two-Spirit, LGBTQIA+ and BIPOC artisans, makers, and creatives exploring their craft in Western Massachusetts. The next market will take place on Saturday, May 10th from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the Florence Civic Center with the support of their vibrant visionary sponsors, Bloom Local, High Five Books, Translates Gender, and Hope and Feathers Printing and Framing. Additional thanks to Mass Humanities and the Mass Cultural Council for funding this project. To sponsor an episode of Rooted Resilience, please visit rootedresilience.substack.com/sponsors. Now back to our show. I asked my guests what is blooming for them now. I get really delighted hearing about Jey and M's vision for the future of the market, knowing the journey seems to have just begun for this powerful pair of collaborators.
Well, I think the market itself is really blooming. Like we've talked about, we've had a lot of growth over the last year, and Em and I are looking forward to getting some time soon to kind of dream about what's ahead, as well as make some, real concrete plans. But for me, just the growth has really been heartening, and like all the support and how successful it's been. I think we're really proving that this is a viable concept. And I think we have a lot of dreams for this project in different ways. But for me personally, I'm still trying to do that dance of like, I'm new to markets. What should I go to and participate in as I live through like a year of observing what's active in the Valley? And we have a lot of artists and makers who are a part of like really amazing events and spaces in the Valley as well. I've been excited to have some of my work in Win-Win in East Hampton, which is just an amazing little store focused on on makers and artists. And then I think I'll have some stuff in Zen Frog coming up in Florence and the Artery in Holyoke. So just kind of like working on growing that a little bit, which feels like exciting and strange and mostly exciting. So I think like trying to work that in along with giving myself more space to go back to what does being an artist mean to me, in addition to like being a maker, and a designer or whatever, all the other things that I am. So, yeah.
And a dog daddy.
And a dog dad.
I think the key word in terms of what's on the horizon really is collaboration. That feels like that anchors a lot of the things that Jay and I have talked about over the last several months, and that we really need and want to make some intentional space and time to dream into and sort steps. In the perfect world, we'd be able to hold this as like a solid part-time business with a lot of different components. And maybe that will happen and maybe it won't. But we do see a lot of need for a lot of different things that we're excited to provide. And we also, have to balance out the rest of our lives and those needs. So that is definitely part of the dance that we're sorting. On my horizon, the last 7 months have not been making months for me, which has felt really hard. That's the place that I anchor into. That's the place that really helps me to quiet and settle and navigate all the things. And I'm finally now in a place where my studio is back in order after mold and needing to rebuild all of my surfaces. I was lucky enough to get 2 different grants to support a purchase of some equipment that will help me to move into silk screening, which was one of my original loves when I was in college, but is really inaccessible in a lot of ways and also very toxic. And so I will have a better and safer way to navigate that will be more affordable. And, at some point before I stopped making, I was in the process of illustrating a children's book that I had written, and I think that's going to come back online. But I'm really invested in understanding how my work can turn into a more like public access type of existence, like how people can find things on the streets that, like really speak to them in a different way and cultivate a sense of community around, like branding, but not like branding in a commercial sense, like branding in the sense of belonging, right? Like how we become connected through the things that we encounter. And I'm excited to be able to explore that more and to be able to have some of the tools that I need to make that happen. And I'm also a little like, how does that all fit in the land of tabling at a market? But also those tools will give me the opportunity to create some things that will be different than what I have traditionally offered. And that's going to be really brilliant and might lead to some collaborations with Jay, which will be fun. So I think that's part of what's on the horizon. I've had some really interesting shifts professionally in the last few years, and I feel like 2025 will be a little bit more settled in terms of the contract work that I have. And, I have the beauty of working with you, Luc, to bring forward the Rooted Resilient project. And I'm really interested in going back out into the community and building more connections, more really strong, loving, tender connections for all the different things that are going on, and to really like celebrate the amazing people that we have here in the Valley. I don't know if I have in this moment a really explicit vision, as much as I hope what we endeavor to do is always responsive to the needs of our community, and that it always centers community care and resilience in the space of making amazing art.
I think one of a few things. One is, I think we already do this, but like creating a place for people to feel valued within their identity, whether that's being a part of the queer trans community, identifying as a person of color, anything, right? Like that is not something that you're succeeding despite that. It's because of that, right? And it's centered in what you're making. And then also just like straight up financial prosperity, right? I mean, hearing about how successful our vendors are, both anecdotally and also through the data that we gather, is hugely important. I will think about how it feels to look back and say, like, over a year, we know that we've helped generate this much money right back into our community is really powerful. And then honestly, thinking about how it grows really for me, right? And also a big part of that is how we continue our authentic commitment to connecting with communities of color in the Valley, because that's seriously important to us, and doing it in a way that is not like savior design, that's truly authentic and building relationships, because we care about everybody in our community and acknowledge the different experiences that we have. And then I think Em and I talked a bit ago about, like, I think it's important for us to start putting out there some of our bigger dreams, right? It's kind of that thing of, I'm not a manifestation girly, but if we don't start like putting it out there, right, you never know what could happen. And I think within all kinds of communities, there's overlapping efforts. And I think in some ways as creators, where I was like, I'm going to do my own thing. I want to start my own thing. Not in a bad way, but I talk to folks all the time who are like, I want to open a physical space, and wouldn't it be great to have that? And I love that we all have that. And I would be lying if I said I didn't want that too, right? Ever since the get-go, it was this dream of a space. And maybe that's because we're all craving a space, right? And so we all are trying to find pathways of how to create that. But I still want to pursue all the collaborative pop-ups we're doing and the pop-ups. But there's a big part of me that is wanting to cultivate a more permanent space. And what that looks like yet, I don't think we know. But I think that's part of, in some, not subconscious, but like under their way of all this, like proving we're doing a viability and support and collecting, it's like leading to something bigger. Or it could help us get there. And I'm excited about that, because I don't think there are enough queer physical spaces here. And our community is undergoing some changes in those ways. But there's a lot of us, and there's still a lot that can be supported. So I don't think it's a competition, but I think it's about figuring out what's out there and how can we connect to that and what is still missing, and find that gap or that niche to fill.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think too, the thing that came to me while you were talking, Jay, was funny. I was like, why was I hesitant to say this? You know, we've had a little bit of experience in terms of offering some programming to support our artists. I mean, a very little bit. And mostly it's just a time component that has prevented us from being able to do it more regularly. And I look at, we're very blessed in Western Massachusetts to have a lot of foundations that support creatives. And there's this really interesting line where a lot of the makers that we engage in our community in these markets don't necessarily either know about those resources or don't feel comfortable accessing them. Or there's some like invisible question mark of, are you an artist, hanging over their head that prevents them from engaging in the ways that like someone else would. And I really want to just recognize that, part of what we did before in terms of a Skillshare in preparation for our first market helped to make that information more accessible. So it's not trying to replace all of the resources that are already here in the Valley, but it's trying to look at how do we help this to be like a peer-led experience that draws from everybody's wisdom, also provides more and new information that helps them to get to the same level that everybody else is getting to, and to do it in an environment that's 110% supportive and inclusive and centering their needs in terms of their identity and how they exist in this world. And I think that's part of our dreaming too, is what does that look like? And how do we collaborate? How do we partner? How do we build that?
I ask M and Jey if they want to share any words of wisdom for other creators, and I'm not surprised to receive some deeply practical and heartfelt nuggets. Here they are.
Part of it, there is like some intentionality to selling your work and thinking about it in that way, right? As something that is to be consumed or enjoyed or whatever by other people. But I think Some of our most successful artists in our network, I think they have this just commitment to sharing themselves, right? Like unapologetically. And I think that's what art is all about. And so I think that is what really resonates with people, right? It's that willingness to be vulnerable. Maybe you're sharing your art is about your identity or whatever. Not everybody has to make art like that, right? But I think that's some of our most powerful things that I've seen, or at least with me as a consumer appreciator of art as well. But I think that's where you can find that sweet spot of success that also feels authentic and good to you, right? Because like you're doing it from your values in a way that feels good. And then that by virtue of you being vulnerable and open resonates with people. And then you make money. It's great. That's not my experience, but I think that's like I've seen this with other people. Maybe a little bit for me, but no, like some of our makers have said like our events are their best, aka most successful of the year. That is so powerful to me. That's amazing. That's so cool. And like I'm so happy for them.
Yeah, it's a whole different experience when you hear a maker tell you that, and you're a maker as well.
And they do that for a living. Like we'll being a tiny part of helping support somebody's dream of living how they want to live is just very rewarding.
Yeah. I think I'm sort of going one of two directions. Maybe I'll just say both. I think the first thing that I want to share is like, just take the step, right? It can feel super intense to apply to a market or to apply to be part of a group exhibition or anything. And I just really want to encourage people to just take the step and then just take another step and another step, right? It's really, there's no like magical formula or moment when you're super ready. You know, I've had some of the most surprising opportunities from the most unexpected places when I felt the absolutely least prepared to take it. And, you know, there's a lot under the psychology of that. But particularly in relationship to the market, I think, you know, we so deeply wanted new makers to feel confident and comfortable stepping in. And so I just want to be like, just apply for the market, right? We're ready to field questions and to help you feel supported and to celebrate you when you make your first sale and, you know, all of those things. You don't have to have a really complex table set up. You don't have to have 50 million products to sell. Just come and, you know, our first market, we had a lot of 4-foot spaces for people. And I think that was helpful in some ways. Yeah. Less table to fill makes you look like you have much more. And I think also takes some of the pressure off in terms of having enough.
Yeah. I was going to say, you don't have to roll in with a full setup, right? I think there's a lot of pressure and I definitely... But I like that stuff. So I went down that path, right, of wanting to feel like super put together. But we have makers who are successful who kind of show up with a few things that they're focusing on. And I think that's, like Em was kind of saying, just taking a step. And you'll, at least in our markets, you'll have a lot of support and you'll be in an environment where, like, I've seen just all the makers be so supportive of each other, whether it's like trading parties or watching each other's table or just like the encouragement to be there.
And you know, there was a really nice exchange this last market where we couldn't accommodate one maker to come into the event who's, you know, tabled with us before. And she asked a friend who was in the market to share some space. And that was amazing. I was so excited when I walked into that area and I was like, oh, she's here. And so I think even opportunities like that, you know, just being a guest of another artist can also be a really great way to enter in. The other thing I really want to say, and it's something I just had this moment last week where I was like, if I had just heard this when I was 22, it would have made such a difference to me. And this is not my wisdom. This is part of a professional development series that I'm engaging with. And I, for the life of me, cannot remember the name of the person who said this, and I will forever feel badly about that. But the context was essentially, you could be an artist and art could be your full-time work and you could still be absolutely stressed out and not really enjoying what you're doing. Or you could be an artist that has 3 contract jobs and a family and be spending what you have to spend in the studio of 3 hours a week. And no matter what the variation or breakdown is of your personal and professional responsibilities and what's paying the bills and what's not, that is the dance of being an artist inside of a capitalistic society. And I just had like such an aha moment. Like, I'm almost crying right now. I'm like, oh, if somebody had just said that when I was 22, it would have helped me on so many levels. And I think that's really important to like put out into the world over and over again. It's not a failing of us as artists to not be able to figure out the perfect solution to make art. It's that we live inside of systems that really don't want this to be in place. So 30 minutes a week, 12 hours a week, your full-time job, your side hobby, it's all really powerful and important.
We ask this question in every interview we host, and I was excited to hear what these two had to say. What does rooted resilience mean to you?
I had a few thoughts. So one, I always appreciate how plants have this really like aggressive will to live. So in a sense, like resilience is not giving up, right? Like persistence with purpose. But regarding the market, I kind of think about one, it's slightly cliche, but the phrase like bloom where you're planted, right? Like we're literally a pop-up and we're trying to create these spaces where there's community, wherever we are, like taking up space. But then I also love the metaphor of like the mycelial network, right? If we think about that, and that's like what I think a really good metaphor for our queer and trans and marginalized communities is we create these other networks of care and communication that might kind of be under the surface and are super important and connect really big trees around, right? Like in the community. So it's kind of just like playing with that.
As my partner would say, ditto, kiddo.
I've been reading a book about fungi lately. So
exactly. I'm like, there's this really great documentary. Yeah. I mean, I hear the answer to the question, you know, when we do interviews. So it's a little tricky to be like, is that mine? Or did I just, pick that up from Isa? I think when I think about rooted resilience, I just think we take our home with us, right? Like wherever it is that we show up, that's where our home is. And to me, that's true rooting and true resilience, to just know that it's amazing to have a physical space to call home and to have a community of friends to call home. And at the end of the day, the origins of that really lie deep inside of yourself. And if you can carry that around with you, you're hands down definitely in that space of rooted resilience.
Ditto, kiddo.
That's it for this episode of Rooted Resilience. If something resonated with you, we'd love to hear about it. If you're inspired to talk with us, join an upcoming dialogue circle. We'll be back on the second Tuesday of next month with a fresh new episode.
You can dig deeper into our guests' work and learn about upcoming markets on our blog, where you can view extended show notes and bonus content curated by myself and Jay. Learn more about the Rooted Resilience Project and our upcoming events, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter at rootedresilience.substack.com. If you liked what you heard, please share this episode, rate it, and leave us a review. It helps so much, and we appreciate it deeply. Until next time, take care. We are deeply grateful to our community donors for contributing to our fundraising campaign. Rooted Resilience is a grant and community-funded project, and we still need to raise $6,000 to meet our goal to fund our first season. So if you're passionate about supporting Two-Spirit LGBTQIA+ creative futures, we welcome you to email us at rootedresiliencepod@gmail.com to make a donation. All dollar amounts are vital and greatly appreciated. Thank you for centering Two-Spirit LGBTQIA+ creatives with us. This work is more meaningful than ever, as we, especially the most vulnerable among us, weather a storm of attempts to erase our very existence as individuals.